State University bookstore will sell Mr. Pinsky's books following the reading in the tent directly behind the stage, and they will be there after the reading, and Mr. Pinsky has agreed to a book signing at that time also. Another thing, right after this event, the World 2000 Multimedia Show is going on in what some people have referred to as the large ashtray out here, the big round thing, and that is slides and music from architecture students' trip around the world. And as if those weren't enough announcements, here are some upcoming events for tomorrow. At 2 o'clock, these are all in Tent 1 here under the big top. At 2 o'clock, Dr. Peter Benson, the founder and president of the Search Institute, is speaking. At 4 o'clock, Michael Piriano, the CEO of Court-Appointed Special Advocate Program, better known as CASA. At 6:30, Natalie DeValle from the Antoine du Saint-Exupéry Foundation. And at 8 p.m. tomorrow night, Scott Simon, host of National Public Radio's Weekend Edition. Like all events at UniverCity, these are stimulating, thought-provoking, fun, and open to the public and totally free. Are you going to come up? You're going to come up here if I introduce you, right? He's living on some kind of Jersey time. Robert Pinsky. Robert Pinsky was born in New Jersey in 1940. And that, you're glad to know, is one of those fortuitous dates for which it is easy to do the math, and therefore it puts audiences at ease. He grew up in a resort town on the ocean and has called the time of his own beginnings a seed time because so many things were just starting along with Robert Pinsky. Rock and roll music, television, and an American understanding of racism through the ordeal of Jackie Robinson. These things influence and inform his poems, along with the rhythms of jazz music, the sounds that are germane to spoken language, the rhythms and meters common to poetry, the voice of the poet as it is conveyed by the poem, and the meanings and inspiration that readers take from poetic texts. Following an unprecedented 3-year term as U.S. Poet Laureate, Robert Pinsky has recently been succeeded by Stanley Kunitz. I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, what is the Poet Laureateship? Why do we have one, and how can I get one for myself? Well, these are good questions. In Greek mythology, Daphne was this tomboy daughter of a river god. And as a river god, he was into things like fertility. But Daphne was one of those strong-willed, fast-running, hard-playing women in mythology who vow never to exchange their short tracksuit-style togas for wedding weeds. One day Daphne was out hunting and having what the Greeks thought of as a particularly bad hair day. And Apollo caught a glimpse of her across a wooded room. He is said to have thought something akin to, "Wow, I think she would clean up okay." She is sometimes said to have been Apollo's first crush. Anyway, she heard him say this, and so Daphne took off running away from him. But it's really hard to outrace a god. And as he was closing in on her, she morphed into a laurel tree. Whereupon, Apollo uttered an elegant speech and declared that the leaves of the laurel tree should forever crown the heads of victors in war and the poets who sing their stories. Hence, from Ovid to today, the Poet Laureate is the official poet of the monarchy or the state. Now, for those of you who are students of grammar, rhetoric, or poetry, had you graduated in medieval times, the university would have placed a laurel wreath on your head. And I think this is a good idea, because leaves cause less hat head than mortarboards do. And the plight of Daphne adequately illustrates the dangers inherent in unruly tresses. But in the 17th century, John Dryden was appointed and then removed from Britain's Poet Laureateship. And then the current official payment of England's head poet was set. That is, £100 and a promising sounding butt of sack, which means quantity of wine. Traditionally, the Poet Laureate's job was to whip up something smashing on the king's birthday, the new year, whenever someone famous died, or whenever the king just wanted to hear something pretty. This poem-on-demand thing didn't set very well with the creative temperament, so in just 300 short years, The Poet Laureate on both sides of the pond has evolved into a person who has the freedom to define his own duties. I believe there has never, no, yeah, never mind. I should never make up things. You know that whenever brilliant things come to you while you're speaking, don't say them because they won't be true. I learned that. Robert Pinsky's role as Poet Laureate has been largely to celebrate the importance of poetry in ordinary lives. His favorite poem project, a compilation of audio and video recordings of average Americans reciting their favorite poems and commenting upon their relationship with the author's text, has done much to correct the inappropriate perception of poems as precious and ornamental uses of language. He has shown that poetry is useful, persuasive discourse, which speaks to everyone, not just the academic elite, or the artistic, or the depressed. Many of you will have seen parts of the project, as well as Mr. Pinsky himself, on the NewsHour, where he continues as a staff essayist. There he occasionally reads from his own work, always leaving us wanting more of it. Certainly, he has been America's most visible poet laureate. And in that role, he has effectively encouraged the reading and appreciation of poems in our culture. In his autobiographical poem, Autumn Quartet, written on the occasion of his own birthday and published in his latest book, Jersey Rain, Pinsky reveals, quote, "When I was a child, I wanted to be a knight, helmeted, living by a noble code above the crowd, to serve, to carry a sword and a shield, blazoned with symbolic meanings. Lucky you, Robert Pinsky, to get to achieve that childhood vision. Here this evening to read his own poems, please help me welcome Robert Pinsky."
We should just let Ray come and introduce me for another half an hour or so. I'm very delighted to be here. I've had an extremely good time on this campus today, and intellectually stimulating and encouraging one too. At the class I visited and the students I talked to, this is a very good idea you have here, and you're a fortunate community. I'm going to read to you from my own work, and I also will be happy to talk to you about the favorite poem project that Ray mentioned, and if you want to talk about what's a poet laureate anyway, I'm happy to do that too. And I'll warn you that sometimes, I like to make these occasions as informal as possible. And it's possible that after reading poems to you for 25 minutes or so, I might stop and invite questions or kind remarks. And there's a saying in the music business, we do requests. If there's somebody here who knows a poem by me and would like to hear me read it aloud, I promise I will do that too. And if you can't remember the title of the poem, you say, it's the one with the big wheel in it, or it's the one where people go to the beach. I'll try my best to come up with it. I'll start by reading poems to you from the new book of poems, Jersey Rain. And the first poem is very short. It contains 26 words, and the words are arranged in alphabetical order. The poem also contains marks of punctuation, including an equal sign, and when I come to it, I will pronounce it. The poem is called ABC. ABC. Anybody can die, evidently. Few go happily, irradiating joy, knowledge, love. Many need oblivion, painkillers, quickest respite, sweet time unafflicted, various world, X equals your zenith. Thank you. It's a very easy poem to memorize. And I do think that, thank heavens, the zenith or peak of life is X the unknown. We don't know what is the highest or best moment in a life. And it would be awful to know that the peak had passed. It's better to think that it always possibly could be ahead. I'll read the first poem in Jersey Rain. And it's a poem for which I have the Favorite Poem Project to thank. I urge you in this community to have a favorite poem reading. There have been thousands of them around the country. Usually get the mayor of the town, police officer, fireman, firefighter, not just students and teachers, little kids, represent different ethnic groups. I've gone to some of them, mostly in big cities. In Des Moines, we had the mayor of Des Moines and the governor both read poems, along with school kids and people reading in their native languages, immigrant people. In Seattle, the fire chief of Seattle read in uniform. He read Frost's poem, Fire and Ice. And at a reading in Wichita, Kansas, a man who was a welder by profession read a Japanese poem. I think he got from some New Age book or something. And I loved the formula of the book was when I this, of that poem was when I this, I that, when I this, I that. It was a 14th century Japanese poem, and I liked that formula so well that in the airplane back home from Kansas, I stole it. This is my poem, Samurai Song. Samurai Song. When I had no roof, I made audacity my roof. When I had no supper, my eyes dined. When I had no eyes, I listened. When I had no ears, I thought. When I had no thought, I waited. When I had no father, I made care my father. When I had no mother, I embraced order. When I had no friend, I made quiet my friend. When I had no enemy, I opposed my body. When I had no temple, I made my voice my temple. I have no priest, my tongue is my choir. When I have no means, fortune is my means. When I have nothing, death will be my fortune. Need is my tactic. Detachment is my strategy. When I had no lover, I courted my sleep. Maybe for a time I'll just read ahead in the book. I read the first poem in the book, now I'll read the second poem in the book. That poem ends, when I had no lover, I courted my sleep. Sleeplessness or insomnia is one of the themes that run through the book. And this poem is thinking about all the times in my life I have fallen asleep or endeavored to. And it goes back to childhood memory of things I thought as I was falling asleep. And maybe I'll mention a formal thing. All the lines in this poem end either with the sound of the letter N or the sound of the letter L. It just makes it a kind of a rhyme. The poem is called Vessel. Vessel. What is this body as I fall asleep again? What I pretended it was when I was small. A crowded vessel, a starship or submarine, dark in its dark element, a breathing hull, arms at the flanks, the engine heart and brain pulsing, feet pointed like a diver's, the whole resolutely diving through the oblivion of night with living cargo. O carrier shell that keeps your trusting passengers from all, Some 20,000 times now you have gone out into blackness, tireless as a seal, blind always as a log, but plunging on across the reefs of coral that scrape the keel. O veteran, immersed from toe to crown, buoy the population of the soul toward their destination before they drown. Having read the first and second poems in the book, I'll read the third poem. I have a plan. There are a few poems in the book that are odes, poems addressed to something, poems in the second person addressing a thing and celebrating. And I was at an academic conference of Keats, and somebody said, do contemporary poets ever write odes? And the consensus seems to be, well, no, they don't. And I immediately thought, odes. The poem is called Ode to Meaning. I like meaning. Autobiographical fact that I haven't written about a lot in my poems, but it comes into this book and the preceding one, is when I was a kid, when I was 11 years old, my mother had a head injury. And I never know how much it's sad or how much it's funny, because it's like, oh, you fall on your head? Well, yes, she did. And someone who had always been strange became, for a number of years, what Mel Brooks would call very, 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 very nervous. And it was a big element in the history of the family, and I think it made the idea of meaning, I think it made me permanently rather a square. That order and meaning came to seem very exotic and unusual and attractive to me, so that it would be impossible for me to be the kind of absurdist artist or writer that I quite admire and enjoy. My example of this is, and I've sometimes heard people say, it was that kind of family where every day they ate exactly at 6 o'clock, not at 6:01 or 5:59, and everybody sat at the same place, they had the same dishes in the same days of the week, and it was all completely routine. And I would think, oh, that sounds so beautiful. Ode to Meaning. I'll interrupt myself to say that this is related to the alphabet poem I began with. The opposite of meaning is not necessarily meaninglessness. It might be an arbitrary system or meaning, like alphabetical order. And the third stanza in this poem, like the first poem I read to you, does take the words in alphabetical order. Ode to Meaning. Dire one and desired one. Savior. Sentencer. In an old allegory, you would carry a chained alphabet of tokens. Ankh, badge, cross, dragon, engraved figure guarding a hallowed intaglio, jasper kinema of legendary mind, naked omphalos pierced by quills of rhyme or sense, Torah-like, unborn vein of will, xenophile yearning out of zero. Untrusting, I court you. Wavering, I seek your face. I read that Crusoe's knife reeked of you, that to defile you the soldier makes the rabbi spit on the Torah. I'll drown my book, says Shakespeare. Drowned walker, revenant. After my mother fell on her head, she became more than ever your sworn enemy. She spoke sometimes like a poet or critic of 40 years later, or she spoke of the world as Thersites spoke of the heroes. Quote, I think they have swallowed one another. I would laugh at that miracle. You also in the laughter, warrior angel, your helmet the zodiac, rocket-plumed, your spear the beggar's finger pointing to the mouth, your heel planted on the serpent, formulation, your face of vapor, the wreath of cigarette smoke crowning Bogart as he winces through it. You, not in the words, not even between the words, but a torsion, a cleavage, a stirring even in Arctic ice, even at the dark ocean floor, even in the cellular flesh of a stone. Gas, gossamer. My poker friends question your presence in a poem by me, passing the magazine one to another, like apes with an oyster. Not the stone, and not the words. You like a veil over my friend Arthur's headstone, the passage from Proverbs Arthur chose when he was too sick to teach, but still well enough to read. I sat beside the master craftsman, delighting him day after day, ever at play in his presence. You, a soothing veil of distraction, playing over dying Arthur, playing in the hospital, thumbing his Bible, fuzzy from medication, ever courting your presence. And you, the prognosis, you in the cough. Gesturer, when is your spur, your cloud? You in the airport rituals of greeting and parting. Indicter, who is your claimant? Bell at the gate, spiderweb iron bridge, cloak, video, aroma, rue. What is your elected silence? Where was your seed? What is imagination but your lost child born to give birth to you? Dire one, desired one, savior, sentencer, absence, or presence ever at play. Let those scorn you who never starved in your dearth. If I dare to disparage your harp of shadows, I taste wormwood and motor oil. I pour ashes on my head. You are the wound. You be the medicine. I'll read another poem or two to you, and then we'll see if anybody has a poem they'd like me to read or something they want to ask about what I have read or about anything else. This is another ode, a little bit shorter than that one. It's called To Television. To television. And I try to take a balanced view of television. You know, I think it's something so pervasive and important in our lives that in a way we don't expect to write a poem about it. I think often people think the things that are really there aren't poetic. Also, it tends to hardened attitudes, either contempt or excessive enthusiasm or an academically fashionable embrace of all of it. And I try to do none of the above in the poem. To television. Not a window on the world, but as we call you, a box, a tube. Terrarium of dreams and wonders. Coffer of shades. Ordained cotillion of phosphors or liquid crystal. Homey miracle. Tub of acquiescence. Vein of defiance. Your patron in the pantheon would be Hermes. Raster dance, quick one, little thief, escort of the dying and comfort of the sick. In a blue glow, my father and little sister sat snuggled in one chair watching you. Their wife and mother was sick in the head. I scorned you and them as I scorned so much. Now, I like you best in a hotel room. Maybe minutes before I have to face an audience. Behind the doors of the armoire. Box inside a box. Tom and Jerry. Or also brilliant and reassuring Oprah Winfrey. Thank you, for I watched Sid Caesar speaking French and Japanese, not through knowledge, but imagination, his quickness. And thank you, I watched live Jackie Robinson stealing home the image, O strung shell, enduring fleeter than light, like these words we remember in. They, too, are winged at the helmet and ankles. I'll read one more poem to you, and then I'll warn the person who might work the house lights, and then I'd like to have the lights up so we can take some requests and questions and gentle remarks. And we'll do that for about 10, 15 minutes, and then I'll read poems to you for another 10 or 15 minutes, and then it'll be a nice evening. Maybe I'll stay with this book. Along with the television, there are a lot of poems in the book about instruments and implements. The alphabet, in a way, is also an instrument or implement. There's a poem, well, in the previous book about the saxophone. There's a poem about the record player and recorded music. I read you the one to television. There's a poem about the computer. And this poem is about a specific piano. And since I started a narrative to do with my mother's fall, I'll read this poem. I was not present when my mother fell. Very characteristically, I was not with the family. Everyone else in the family was there. And I very characteristically was home and very characteristically was playing the piano. And my sister was present, but cannot remember the event. She cannot see that in her memory. Her first memory of it was of them carrying our mother home. They didn't know what was going to happen to her. Was she going to live or die? And them carrying her in the door and me sitting around the piano, at the piano, and then turning around to see what's happening. And she remembers thinking, now Robert's going to know. Robert is going to know that our mother fell. And my sister told me that story, and it brought back my tremendously passionate attachment to that particular piano and how much I loved that piano. And the piano really was my parent and my lover. That piano was my friend. So this, in my mind, is also an ode, though it's not addressed to the piano in the second person. The poem is called The Green Piano. When I'm finished, it'll be your turn. And then we'll go back I'll do a few more poems. The Green Piano. Aeolian. Gratis. Great thunderer. Half-ton infant of miracles, torn free of charge from the universe by my mother's will. You must have amazed that half-respectable street of triple-decker families and rooming house painters the day that the bowl-ankled, oversized hams of your legs bobbed in procession up the crazy paved front walk, embraced by the arms of Mr. Poppick, the seltzer man, and Corridon, his black-skinned helper, tendering your thighs thick as a man up our steps. We are not reptiles. Even the male body bears nipples, as if to remind us we are designed for dependence and nutriment, past into future. O Europe, they budged your case, its ponderous guts of iron and brass, 10 kinds of hardwood and felt, up those heel-pocked risers and treads, splintering tinder. Angelic nurse of clamor, yearner, tinkler, dominator, O elephant, you were for me. When the tuner, Mr. Otto Van Brunt, pronounced you excellent, despite the cracked sounding board, we obeyed him and swabbed your ivories with hydrogen peroxide. You blocked a doorway and filled most of the living room. The sofa and chairs dwindled to a ram and ewes, cowering. Now the colored neighbors could be positive that we were crazy and rich, as we thought the people were who gave you away for the moving out of their carriage house. They had painted you the color of pea soup. The drunk man my mother hired never finished antiquing you, ivory and umber, so you stood half done. A throbbing, mistreated noble, genuine, my mother's swollen livestock of love, lost one, unmastered. You were the beast she led to the shrine of my genius, mistaken. Endlessly I bonged according to my own chord system, humoresque, the talk of the town, what I say. Then one day they painted you pink. Is how my sister remembers you the Saturday afternoon when our mother fell on her head, dusty pink as I turn on the bench in my sister's memory to see them carrying our mother up the last steps and into the living room, inaugurating the reign of our confusion. They sued the builder of the house she fell in. With the settlement, they bought a house at last, and one day when I came home from college, you were gone, O mahogany breast, who nursed me through those years of the concussion, and there was a crappy little Baldwin acrosonic in your place. Gleaming, walnut shell, you were gone, O despoiled one, pink one, forever green one, white and gold one, O comforter, a living soul. Thank you. And now either someone will have a request or a question or something to say, or there'll be a prolonged, embarrassing silence. Yes, ma'am? Could I read shirt? I will read shirt. After we have a few more questions, I'll begin again and read shirt. I will think about that. I'll read shirt, and I'll read a poem of mine that I think would give encouragement to a young person in the pursuit and love of poetry. Okay. Yes? Are there any poets from whom I draw inspiration? William Butler Yeats, Emily Dickinson, Elizabeth Bishop, Wallace Stevens, William Carlos Williams, Hart Crane, George Herbert, Ben Jonson, Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, Charlie Parker, Akira Kurosawa. Many artists do give me encouragement, and I make the list long in the spirit of the question, not to make fun of the question. I think the question is the main question about art. Art comes from art, and you are inspired by great works. And works that get under your skin, that appeal to you. So, yes, there are a host of poets, many of them in the English 16th century. I love Fulk Greville and Thomas Campion, Ben Jonson. Want to hear Ben Jonson? Here's Ben Jonson. My picture left in Scotland. He's given a woman his pictures, I imagine it. No small thing in the early 17th century. You don't get it at Photomat. Then he sees her and he mentions my picture and says, oh yeah, I left it in Scotland. Left it in Scotland? Again, at that period, it's like saying I left it in Borneo or something. And this is Ben Jonson's poem, My Picture Left in Scotland. I now think love is rather deaf than blind. For else it could not be that, Cupid is usually blind. I now think love is rather deaf than blind. For else it could not be that she whom I adore so much should cast my love behind. I'm sure my accent to her was as sweet in every close did meet in sentence of as subtle feet as hath the youngest he that sits in shadow of Apollo's tree. Oh, but my conscious fears that fly my thoughts between tell me that she hath seen my 100 of gray hairs, told 47 years, read so much waste as she cannot embrace my mountain belly and my rocky face, and all these, through her eyes, have stopped her ears. Poor man was 47 years old. But he just dances for her in that way. He makes those rhymes come across the sentence. So let's say Ben Jonson. Yes?
Are you a Dodger fan, and could you speak about Jackie Robinson and how important he is to you?
Am I a Dodger fan, and could I speak about Jackie Robinson? I am a Brooklyn Dodger fan. For me, the real Dodgers ended in 1959. And I'm a Dodger fan, a Brooklyn Dodger fan, and a Red Sox rooter. The big hand you get for the Red Sox here in Muncie, I'll remember that. Jackie Robinson is a truly extraordinary American. If all he had been was to be the first black player in the major leagues, it would have been an extraordinary thing for a person to do. But he did it through a combination of ferocity and restraint. When I first fell in love with Jackie Robinson when I was 11, 10 years old, I didn't know anything about his integrating baseball. You know, it was 1951 or so. I just loved anybody who was so bold and ferocious and who stole home. I saw him steal home. He was a great, great base runner, and he tormented the pitchers, and as well as a wonderful hitter, and a leader in the way he played and in himself. And he absorbed insults. He had, in order to accomplish what he had to accomplish, he had to absorb the insults of fools and scoundrels and people who just went along with fools and scoundrels. And that kind of thing takes a lot out of a person. He's somebody who died of old age in his 40s, you know. He visibly wore himself out. And it's one of the most moving things there is in life, is somebody who sacrifices himself for the good of a community. He sacrificed himself not for the good of black people in America, but for the good of the country. And I think he knew he was doing that. And there are very, very, very few instances where one can be quite sure that a person did sacrifice herself or himself in the interest of a community. So I think, unlike many people who are advanced as heroes, you compare him to Beowulf or Jesus or any person that people have said, this is what's to be admired, this is what's admirable, he makes it. And it's just a coincidence, a matter of chance, that the player I liked when I was a little kid, as I got older, I started to realize he's a very impressive human being. So he pops up in the poems from time to time. The want bone. I got a good little agenda. The want bone, shirt, something that was to do with young people. I'll do that. Yes? Questions for me to comment on my own writing process and creative process. I'm happy to answer the question. I will answer it, but it's very important to say everybody's different. It's one of the most important of concepts. Everybody is different, and there's no one way to do these things. Some people are methodical, some not methodical. Some always do this according to routine, some are sloppy. Some know exactly what they're going to do and do it. Some are very intuitive. Whatever personality type you name, someone has made great art who had that personality type. So this is not prescriptive or the way to do it. I write whenever it's inconvenient. I tend not to function well if my family's away. I'm in a beautiful house near the ocean. I can hear the surf. The birds are outside. I'm alone. The writing materials are there. I tend to pray for the phone to ring. Or I think, what's on TV? I wonder what's on TV. And the second poem I read to you, Samurai Song, really was written in an airplane. And I wrote a lot of this book of poems, and my little guide to the sounds of poetry were written largely in airports and airplanes. And I write whenever I should be doing something else. And I I hope I'm writing all the time. I hope I'm thinking like a writer and hoping to get something to write, even as I'm talking to you. The visual effect of the 4 steel columns holding up the tent, the sounds of Muncie and of Ball State. I hope that some part of me right now is trying to think, could you make a work of art out of some of this? Yes, sir? Yes, I'm familiar with many of Neruda's odes, Ode to My Socks and so forth. And he's a great poet, and he probably is one of the models for these poems that are odes. I think he, in the way of the Spanish language and in the way of Neruda, each thing he addresses immediately has a mystic and beautiful life of its own. And when I address television or I address an abused piano, the action of the poem is trying to get to the point where that life will take place. And that's a distinction that occurs to me. Maybe a couple more questions, and then we have a nice little plan. Yes, ma'am? Yes, I do. The question was, do I have recommendations for anybody who wants to become a writer? Your love of the art and your desire to make good works of art has to be based on things you love. I quoted once today, I'll quote again, one of my favorite things I ever heard. I have a CD by the great jazz player, the tenor saxophonist Dexter Gordon. At the beginning there's an interview, and the interviewer says, "Where do you get your inspiration?" The first 2 words he says are, Lester Young. He's Lester Young, he names Billie Holiday, the Ellington Band, and he says one of my main touchstones I use, he says, the music, I still remember the feeling, the thrill the music gave me that I loved when I was young. It still thrills me. I remember that feeling. I want to give other people that feeling. I advise you to find things that you love, even if it's only a paragraph. Type it out. Write it out longhand. Keep a book in which you write the poem or the sentence or the phrase that you love by someone else, and find the things are that you are crazy about. Read the way a cook eats. How was it done? What are the ingredients? What are the techniques? You can only, there are no you can onlys. The path I know in art is the path of loving the art. And you may have very good teachers here, but you can study with Emily Dickinson and Jane Austen and William Faulkner and James Joyce. You can be their student just by typing up, doing the manual labor. You know, maybe if you type up a poem by Emily Dickinson, the poetry god will smile on you and reward you for the manual labor. But also, you will have read that poem word by word, syllable by syllable. If you make a mistake. So make an anthology of things you adore. That's my practical advice to young people who want to be writers. Type up with your own hand. You're having trouble writing, having trouble getting going, you're getting your mind uncluttered. I think I'll type 2 pages from Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. It won't kill you. And then you'll have a book. And you'll have a wonderful book that you can go to when you want inspiration. Maybe one more person and then we'll go back to reading poems. Do I wish poetry had a more central place in our society? No, I am proud of American culture. I love American culture. I admire and respect the Persian culture, where poetry is much more central, the Arabic, certain Eastern European cultures. We are not as monolithic as those cultures. We do not have a single folk culture where the poetry is passed on from grandparents to kids. We do not have an aristocratic tradition, as some Asian country or Eastern European. You know, Eastern Europe, there are countries where a driver will yell, another driver cuts him off. You have no culture. It's not an American insult. we find other things to yell. This is not a cause either for shame or for jingoism. We are different. We are a polyglot culture. I strongly recommend to you the anthology Americans' Favorite Poems. The poems are not all in English. They represent the centrality to people of an art in a culture that has brilliant, wonderful mass media. Wonderful mass culture. I'm not denigrating DVD, television, all the electronic media. They are by their nature on a mass scale. That is central in one way. The medium for a poem is any reader's body. It is inherently on an individual scale. It is central to the person because the poem, the meaning of a poem is by its nature on a human scale. And in our wonderful mass culture, not to be confused with popular culture, something like breakdancing or rap music is popular culture for like a month or 6 weeks. Then it becomes, corporations get involved, it becomes mass culture. We don't have to reject the mass culture to say that we have a tremendous craving in this country for a medium where an art where the medium is an individual person. It's the reader's voice, not the poet as a great performer with a nice personality or a rap artist, but whoever chooses to read the poem. Let me read you one thing from Americans' Favorite Poems, and I urge you all to go to www.favoritepoem.org, favoritepoem.org, and look at the videos. Look at the African-American photographer, almost can remember his name, reads a Sylvia Plath poem, Plath's Jack and the Candlestick. Look at John Doherty, a ditch digger, talking about Whitman. And you'll see what I'm talking about. I love the eclecticism of the anthology. It's a culture in which poetry is not central in one way because we're so polyglot. American culture is improvised, many sources. You don't know where the center is. It's very dynamic and fluid. Akhmatova, Ammons, Archilochus, Arnold, Ashbery, Atwood, Auden, Baraka, Bishop, Black Elk, Blake, Boland, Bradstreet, Brooks, Brown, De Burgos, Burns. The title page alone, the contents page alone, is inspiring to me. At the end, it's Wyatt Yates, Sone no Yoshitara. Look at that little, we have an 11-year-old boy, half African-American, part Japanese, part Hawaiian, does the poem in English and Hawaiian. Adam Zagajewski, Zoji, Burmese, man, talks about Burmese culture. Let me read one of these. I'll read, the poems are printed along with letters from the people who wrote to me about the poem. This letter is from Margaret Whitty, 55, social worker, Detroit, Michigan. For the last 22 years, I have lived in an inner city neighborhood working through the church for social and economic justice and racial reconciliation. As a young woman, I admired this poem. Only now that I am older do I realize what really good advice it is, in addition to the beauty of its music. Marianne Whitty, 55, social worker, Detroit, Michigan. The poem she chose is by Archilochus, the Greek poet who wrote 7 centuries before Christ. Wonderful translation by Kenneth Rexroth. Here's the poem, very short. Will lost in a sea of trouble. Will lost in a sea of trouble. Rise, save yourself from the whirlpool of the enemies of willing. Courage exposes ambushes. Steadfastness destroys enemies. Keep your victories hidden. Do not sulk over defeat. Accept good. Bend before evil. Learn the rhythm which binds all men. Pretty good, huh? And I know what she means by the beauty of it. Those curt, short elements like courage exposes ambushes are set up by the loops of save yourself from the whirlpool of the enemies of willing. That this gesture and this syntax then, boom, boom, boom. So, no, I don't wish poetry were central. It would be like wishing the country was not America. And I think the opportunity for an American poet, I love having the relation I do to the mass culture and the popular culture, and I love the opportunities for the future of poetry in this country. They're exciting, they're not settled. We don't have an hereditary elite and a fixed curriculum of poems. There are attempts to make it that way, it's just not that way, it's a process. So, no, I don't envy Eastern Europe or Persia or Latin America. We're something else, and we have our own strengths and weaknesses to develop. My poem Shirt is it's an attempt to think about some of the history of human ingenuity and suffering behind any object, any artifact, any made thing. The typeface, you know, the font they use to put Ball State University on the bottle of spring water. You know, it's not sans serif or Gothic. It has big serifs, and it has to do with an academic idea. And then the 1 pint 16 fluid ounces is sans serif. And there's even the rings, the annular part of the plastic extrusion are necessary to give it strength, but they also hark back to, they allude to a history of glass making. And the shoulder of the bottle, it all has a history. It all has meaning. It all comes from somewhere. And, you know, the etymology of the words in the aqua vitae is translated water of life, then spring water. Spring is Anglo-Saxon. And the nutrition facts are mostly in the Latin. You know, it's very important. For those of you who want to write, you want to think about the English language. The idea words tend to be monks. Legal words tend to be Latin to a certain point, but then there's all the words like torture, jurisprudence, jury, Norman French. And the earthy words tend to be the Germanic one. You know, the writer didn't think about this when he wrote it, but think about the phrase life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Why is that such a good phrase? Many reasons, but life is basic. Anglo-Saxon, Germanic root. Life. Liberty is libertas, it's Roman, it's a legal idea. Life is basic and physical, because we, in our language, think Germanic words sound physical, because of historical things. Liberty sounds Latin. You may not be thinking about Latin or Germanic, but it affects you. And then, poursuit. The high-class people ride the horse, and they pursue hap. It goes back to the Anglo-Saxon at the end. The basic life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. And that is an artifact. Is he losing his mind up there on the platform? Dial 911 on your cell phone. Shirt. The back, the yoke, the yardage, lapped seams. The nearly invisible stitches along the collar turned in a sweatshop by Koreans or Malaysians gossiping over tea and noodles on their break, or talking money or politics, while one fitted this arm piece with its overseam to the band of cuff eye button at my wrist. The presser, the cutter, the ringer, the mangle, the needle, the union, the treadle, the bobbin, the code. The infamous blaze at the Triangle Factory in 1911. 146 died in the flames on the 9th floor. No hydrants, no fire escapes. The witness in a building across the street who watched how a young man helped a girl to step up to the windowsill, then held her out away from the masonry wall and let her drop. And then another, as if he were helping them up to enter a streetcar and not eternity. A third before he dropped her, put her arms around his neck and kissed him. Then he held her into space and dropped her. Almost at once, he stepped to the sill himself. His jacket flared and fluttered up from his shirt as he came down, air filling up the legs of his gray trousers like Hart Crane's bedlamite, shrill shirt ballooning. Wonderful how the pattern matches perfectly across the placket and over the twin bar-tacked corners of both pockets, like a strict rhyme or a major chord. Prints, plaids, checks, houndstooth, tattersall, madras, the clan tartans invented by mill owners inspired by the hoax of Ossian to control their savage Scottish workers, tamed by a fabricated heraldry. McGregor, Bailey, McMartin. The kilt devised for workers to wear among the dusty, clattering looms. Weavers, carders, spinners. The loader, the docker, the navvy, the planter, the picker, the sorter sweating at her machine in a litter of cotton as slaves in calico head rags sweated in fields. George Herbert, your descendant is a black lady in South Carolina. Her name is Irma, and she inspected my shirt. Its color and fit and feel and its clean smell have satisfied both her and me. We have culled its cost and quality down to the buttons of simulated bone, the buttonholes, the sizing, the facing, the characters printed in black on neckband and tail, the shape, the label, the labor, the color, the shade, the shirt. Thank you. Someone asked me to read The Want Bone. The Want Bone. The tongue of the waves tolled in the earth's bell. Blue rippled and soaked in the fire of blue. The dried mouth bones of a shark in the hot swale gaped on nothing but sand on either side. The bone tasted of nothing and smelled of nothing, a scalded, toothless harp, uncrushed, unstrung. The joined arcs made the shape of birth and craving, and the welded open shape kept mouthing, oh. Ossified cords held the corners together in groined spirals, pleated like a summer dress. But where was the limber grin, the gash of pleasure? Infinitesimal mouths bored away, the beach scrubbed and etched and pickled it clean. But oh, I love you, it sings, my little, my country, my food, my parent, my child. I want you, my own, my flower, my fin, my life, my likeness, my oh. Part of my mind has been trying to think about the very interesting assignment of reading something that would give encouragement to somebody starting out. It's an interesting assignment and also a kind of an invitation to pomposity. Work hard and you can become like me. So I'm trying to think it through as a very good question. I was a failure in school. As I was in the 8th grade, I was in the dumb class. At this point in my life, it's like boasting. And, it is a form of bragging. I was. And the only thing I could do really well for the context was play the saxophone. It's the only thing I was known for. And I wasn't good enough in sports to be a varsity player, and I was not a big social hit, but I had that. And Then I had to deal with the fact in my late teens, it was very inglorious, and we played high school dances and bar mitzvahs and weddings, and we played beach clubs where I grew up, so we would play around the pool and play Latin stuff in the pool and bars. And in my late teens, I had to realize I wasn't good enough to make a mark in the world. I was not going to play like the players I adored and admired. It wasn't musical enough. It was almost kind of a matter of chance that that's what I was doing. Fortunately, I found out there was an art based on things I'd been thinking about, in part of sounds of words, just in time. But I had to deal with that second failure. There's the failure to do the academic things that I was supposed to do, as a bright kid. And then there's the second failure of realizing I wasn't going to be very good at music. And the poem I'm going to read you is in a way similar to Shirt. It's about the saxophone. But it's my attempt in words to do the kinds of things I couldn't do with the horn. And the kind of jazz rhythms and jazz chorus I wanted to be able to make, in a way I try to make in the poem. The saxophone to me is a very important symbol of culture. The saxophone was invented in France by a Belgian man named Sax. Adolphe Sax invented the saxophone. Therefore, it's a European instrument, right? No. It's an American, indeed an African American, black American instrument. Why? Because it was made so by geniuses. People like Dexter Gordon and Lester Young before him, and, so many of them, Johnny Hodges and John Coltrane and Charlie Parker. They made it their instrument. And for me, that's a very important concept. Your attitude as students toward anything I say, towards the works of James Joyce, towards organic physics, towards medieval Latin verse epitaphs, your goal, to make it your instrument. Whatever it is, to make it your instrument. And, I'm spending my life trying to make the English language my instrument, and going behind this poem is my failure to make the saxophone my instrument, and a kind of a tribute to all the strange circuits and divergences and divagations and resurrections and falling back forward to go ahead to that occur in a life, in history, in the history of people, of music, etc. That wasn't the poem. That was talking. I'll read this poem, and then I'll close with another poem. I don't think I left out any requests, did I? No. The poem is called Ginza Samba. And in relation to what I was saying about the eclecticism or syncretism of American culture, Ginza Samba, well, samba, as everybody knows, is a kind of more than dance or music. It's almost a religion in Brazil. Ginza is the Tokyo district, nightclub district in Tokyo. And the recording I have of this tune, it's played by the white Jewish jazz musician Stan Getz. And I believe it's written by an Italian guy. My poem, like the tune, is called Ginza Samba. Ginza Samba. So in a way it's a response to your question, saying that things go a lot of different ways. Ginza Samba. A monosyllabic European named Sax invents a horn. Walla whirla-dee-wah. A kind of twisted brazen clarinet, but with its column of vibrating air shaped not in a cylinder, but in a cone, widening ever outward, and boah, spouting infinitely upward through an upturned, swollen golden bell rimmed like a gloxinia, flowering in Sax's Belgian imagination, and in the unfathomable matrix of mothers and fathers, as a genius graven humming into the cells of the body, or cupped in the resonating grail of memory, changed and exchanged as in the trading of brasses, pearls and ivory, calicos and slave laborers and slave girls, two cousins in a royal family of Niger, known as the Birds or Hawks. In Christendom, one cousin's child becomes a, quote, favorite Negro, end quote, ennobled by decree of the Tsar, and founds a great family, a line of generals, dandies, and courtiers, including the poet Pushkin, killed in a duel concerning his wife's honor, while the other cousin sails in the belly of a slave ship to the port of Baltimore, where she is raped and dies in childbirth. But the infant will marry a Seminole, and in the next chorus of time their child fathers a great hawk or bird with many followers, among them this great-grandchild of the Jewish manager of a Pushkin estate, blowing his American breath out into the wiggly tune uncurling its triplets and sixteenths, the Ginza samba of breath and brass, the reed vibrating as a valve, the ether, the unimaginable wires and circuits of an ingenious box here in my room in this house built 100 years ago while I was elsewhere. It is like falling in love, the atavistic imperative of some one voice or face, the skill, the copper filament, the golden bell full of notes twirling through their invisible element from Rio to Tokyo and back again, gathering speed in the variations as they tunnel the twin-haunted labyrinths of stirrup and anvil, echoing here in the hearkening instrument of my skull. Thank you. Really made out of material of my hometown. My town, Long Branch, New Jersey, my family's been in it a long time. My dad was a noted local athlete, and his father had a bar, the Broadway Tavern, which is the bar right across the street from City Hall where all the cops and politicians drank. And before that, the Prohibition, my grandfather, Dave, had been, he's a bootlegger. Imagine how this makes you feel important. When I was a kid, the chief of police of Long Branch was a guy who had worked for my grandfather in the mobs, you know, with the illegal liquor. It's like being a nobleman's son or something. And my dad and mother both graduated from Long Branch High School, as did my brother and sister, all my cousins, my aunts and uncles. And in a tight place like that, there are all these stories. They're always circulating, and you don't know, is it your dad's story that happened to him or to one of his friends or a made-up story? And it's as though the stories are alive and the people are just temporary conveniences for the stories. And it's almost a form of possession by the dead. And in its own way, it is another model of culture. And it's the to come from a place like that is to understand something about pastness, and how you are a temporary vessel in some ways for these stories and ideas. This last poem, and I will be happy to sign books afterwards, and www.favoritepoem.org, and I guarantee you'll enjoy that anthology too. At Pleasure Bay. In the willows along the river at Pleasure Bay, a catbird singing, never the same phrase twice. Here under the pines a little off the road in 1927, the chief of police and Mrs. W. killed themselves together, sitting in a roadster. Ancient unshaken pilings and underwater chunks of still mortared brick in shapes like bits of puzzle strew the bottom where the landing was for Price's Hotel and Theater. And here's where boats blew 2 blasts for the keeper to shunt the iron swing bridge. He leaned on the gears like a skipper in the hut that housed the works, and the bridge moaned and turned on its middle pier to let them through. In the middle of the summer, 2 or 3 cars might wait for the iron trusswork winching aside, with maybe a child to notice a name on the stern in blackened gold on white. Sandpiper, Patsy Ann, Do Not Disturb, the idler. If a boat was running whiskey, the bridge clanged shut behind it as it passed and opened up again for the Coast Guard cutter slowly as a sundial, and always jammed halfway. The roadbed whole but opened like a switch, the river pulling and coursing between the piers. Never the same phrase twice, the catbird filling the humid August evening near the inlet with borrowed music that he melds and changes. Dragonflies and sandflies, frogs in the rushes, two bodies not moving in the open car among the pines, a sliver of story. The tenor at Price's Hotel in a clown costume unfurls the sorrow gathered in ruffles at his throat and cuffs, high quavers that hold like splashes of light on the dark water, the aria's closing phrases changed and fading, and after a gap of quiet, cheers and applause audible in the houses across the river, some in the audience weeping as if they had melted inside the music. Never the same. In Berlin, the daughter of an English lord, in love with Adolf Hitler, whom she has met. She is taking possession of the apartment of a couple, elderly, well-off Jews. They survived the war to settle here in the Bay. The old lady teaches piano, but the whole world swivels and gapes at their feet as the girl and a high-up Nazi examine the furniture, the glass, the pictures, the elegant story that was theirs and now is a part of hers. A few months later, the English enter the war, and she shoots herself in a park. An adult, upper-class girl, her life that passes into the lives of others, or into a place. The taking of lives. The Chief and Mrs. W. took theirs to stay together as local ghosts. Last flurries of kisses. The revolver's barrel, shivers of a story that a child might hear and half remember, voices in the rushes, a singing in the willows, from across the river faint quavers of music, the same phrase twice and again, ranging and building. Over the high new bridge, the flashing of traffic homeward from the racetrack, with one boat chugging under the arches outward, unnoticed, through Pleasure Bay to the open sea. Here's where the people stood to watch the theater burn on the water. All that night the fireboats kept playing their spouts of water into the blaze. In the morning, smoking pilasters and beams, black smell of char for weeks, the ruin already soaking back into the river. After you die, you hover near the ceiling above your body and watch the mourners a while. A few days more you float above the heads of the ones you knew and watch them through a twilight. As it grows darker, you wander off and find your way to the river and wade across. On the other side, night air, willows, the smell of the river, and a mass of sleeping bodies all along the bank, a kind of singing from among the rushes, calling you further forward in the dark. You lie down and embrace one body, the limbs heavy with sleep reach eagerly up around you, and you make love until your soul brims up and burns free out of you and shifts and spills down over into that other body, and you forget the life you had and begin again on the same crossing, maybe as a child who passes through the same place, but never the same way twice. Here in the daylight, the catbird and the willows, the new cafe with a terrace and a landing, frogs and the cattails where the swing bridge was. Here's where you might have slipped across the water when you were only a presence at Pleasure Bay. Thank you.